There comes a moment in every life when you realize how fragile everything truly is. For Samuel and Martha Hendricks, that moment came in the winter of 1887, stranded in a Wyoming blizzard with night closing in fast. They were miles from help. Their wagon stuck, the cold cutting through every layer they wore. Death wasn't something distant anymore. It was right there with them in that howling wind. Then a man appeared through the snow. A mountain man who'd already made it to safety could have kept walking. Instead, he turned around and walked back into the storm. What would make a stranger risk his own life like that? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started with such promise. Samuel Hendricks stood beside their wagon just after dawn, watching the first light touch the peaks of the Wind River Range. The air held that peculiar stillness that comes before winter truly settles in, crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. He'd been up for an hour already, checking the wagon wheels, redistributing their supplies, making sure everything was secured properly for the day's journey ahead. Martha emerged from the small room they'd rented at Fort Bridger, her gray hair pinned up beneath her bonnet, her worn traveling dress covered by the heavy wool coat Samuel had bought her 3 winters past. Even at 62, she moved with a grace that made his heart catch. 40 years of marriage, and still she had that effect on him. "You're fussing again," she said, a gentle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Just being careful," Samuel replied, though they both knew the truth. He'd been careful his whole life. Careful in his farming, careful in his dealings with neighbors, careful in raising their children. Some might call it caution, others might call it fear of taking chances, but careful had kept them alive and together through drought, disease, and the loss of 2 sons before they'd reached their 5th birthdays. Their daughter Rebecca waited for them in Oregon. Letters had come throughout the summer, each one more insistent than the last. "Come before winter," she'd written in August. "The journey's too hard once the snows start." But there'd been the harvest to bring in, debts to settle, a lifetime of belongings to sort through and decide what could be carried and what must be left behind. Now it was late November, and they were finally on their way. Fort Bridger bustled with activity even at this early hour. Trappers and traders preparing for winter, soldiers drilling in the courtyard, a family of emigrants making repairs to their wagon, late travelers like themselves, pushing their luck against the season. Samuel had spoken with them the evening before, a young couple with 3 small children heading for California. The husband had the look of desperation about him, the kind that comes from running from something rather than running toward it. "Best wait for spring," Samuel had suggested quietly. The young man had shaken his head. "Can't wait. Got people expecting us." Samuel understood that pressure, that pull of obligation and hope, but he also understood the mountains, having crossed them once before as a much younger man. The high country didn't care about your plans or your reasons. It simply was, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. A trader named Hoskins approached them as Samuel helped Martha onto the wagon seat. He was a grizzled man who'd spent 30 years in these mountains, his face weathered to the texture of old leather. "Heading out today?" Hoskins asked, though it wasn't really a question. "We are," Samuel confirmed. "Weather's been holding, but I don't like the look of those clouds building west." Hoskins gestured toward the mountains. "Might want to consider staying another few days." Samuel felt Martha's hand rest lightly on his arm. She wasn't pushing, wasn't pulling, just present, letting him know she'd support whatever he decided. It was her way, had always been her way. She'd followed him from Pennsylvania to Iowa, from Iowa to Nebraska, never complaining when the farming failed, never saying, "I told you so," when his careful plans went awry. He looked at those western clouds, then back at the fort. Another few days meant more money spent on lodging, on feed for the horses. It meant arriving at Rebecca's even later, deeper into winter. And there was something else. Something he hadn't told Martha yet. Something the doctor in Nebraska had told him just before they left. "Heart's getting weak, Samuel," Dr. Pritchard had said, his voice low and serious. "You've got time yet, but not as much as you might hope. Months, maybe. Year at most, if you're careful." Careful. That word again. Samuel made his decision. "Weather looks fine to me. We'll make good time today. Find shelter before dark." Hoskins shrugged. "Your call. Just remember, high country's no place to be caught out after dark, especially this time of year." They left Fort Bridger with the sun climbing toward mid-morning, the wagon wheels crunching over frozen earth. The trail was well marked here, worn smooth by years of immigrant traffic. Other travelers had scratched messages on rocks and trees along the way, dates, names, destinations. Samuel wondered if any of them had made it to where they were going, or if their bones lay scattered somewhere in these endless mountains. Martha sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, occasionally reaching up to adjust her bonnet when the wind picked up. She didn't talk much during travel, preferring to watch the country roll by to notice the small things, a hawk circling overhead, wildflowers still clinging to life in sheltered spots, the play of light on distant peaks. On her left hand, she wore the wedding ring he'd given her 4 decades ago. Simple gold, worn thin now from years of work and wear. He'd been so nervous giving it to her, afraid she'd think it too plain, too cheap. But she'd slipped it on her finger and never taken it off, even when times were hardest, and selling it might have meant the difference between eating and going hungry. "What are you thinking about?" Martha asked, noticing his gaze. "Just remembering," Samuel said. "Our wedding day, how young we were." "Young and foolish," Martha replied, but her smile was warm. "Thinking we could take on the world. We did take it on, still are." "Yes," she agreed, "though the world's gotten a bit heavier to lift these days." They both fell quiet, acknowledging what didn't need to be said aloud. That age had crept up on them, that simple tasks took longer now, that rest came harder, and morning stiffness lasted longer. But they were still here, still together, still moving forward. The morning passed peacefully. They stopped once to water the horses at a creek, eating a cold lunch of bread and cheese while the animals drank. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and Samuel noticed the first scattered snowflakes drifting down from a sky that had turned from blue to gray. "Maybe we should turn back," Martha said quietly, watching the snow. Samuel looked at her, surprised. Martha rarely questioned his decisions, rarely expressed doubt. "It's just a few flakes," he said. "Probably pass over quickly." But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't true. The wind had shifted, coming now from the northwest, and there was a weight to the air that spoke of serious weather moving in. Still, they'd come 15 miles already. Turning back meant admitting defeat, meant more delays, meant what, exactly? Why was he so stubborn about this? Because time was running short, because he wanted to see Rebecca one more time, wanted to meet the grandchildren he'd only heard about in letters, because if he was going to die, he wanted it to be out here, in the wild country, the way his own father had died, not wasting away in a bed, not becoming a burden. He hadn't planned it consciously, but now, watching the snow begin to fall in earnest, Samuel realized what he'd been doing all along. He'd been gambling with their lives, pushing forward when wisdom said to wait, all because of his own pride and fear. "We keep going," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "There's a trading post another 10 miles up the trail. We'll make it before dark." Martha didn't argue. She simply pulled her coat tighter and resettled herself on the seat. They pushed on into the afternoon, into the thickening snow. The flakes fell faster now, accumulating on the trail, making it harder to see the path ahead. The horses struggled. their breath coming in great clouds of steam. Samuel kept the reins steady, guiding them forward, always forward. It was 3 hours later when the wheel hit the hidden rut. The crack echoed like a gunshot across the silent landscape. The wagon lurched violently to one side, throwing Martha against Samuel. He managed to keep his seat, hauling back on the reins to stop the horses before they dragged the broken wagon any farther. They climbed down to assess the damage. The rear wheel had snapped 2 spokes and bent the rim. It could be repaired, given time and the right tools, but not quickly. Not in this weather. Not with darkness coming on fast and the temperature dropping by the minute. Samuel stared at the broken wheel, feeling the weight of his mistake settle onto his shoulders like the snow settling onto the ground. He'd done this. His stubbornness, his pride, his refusal to listen to wisdom had brought them to this moment. "How bad is it?" Martha asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. "Bad," Samuel admitted. "We can't move the wagon like this." They stood together in the falling snow, miles from help, with night approaching and the storm intensifying. This was how it ended, Samuel thought. This was the price of his choices. Then Martha did something unexpected. She reached out and took his hand, her grip warm despite the cold. "We've been in tight spots before," she said calmly. "We'll figure this out together." Her faith in him, her absolute trust even now, broke something inside Samuel's chest. He wanted to confess everything, the doctor's warning, his half-formed plan to spare her the long decline, his foolish pride that had brought them to this place. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he squeezed her hand and said, "I'm sorry, Martha. I should have listened, should have waited." "Maybe," she replied, "but we're here now, so we deal with what is, not what might have been." They worked together to unhitch the horses, to gather what supplies they could carry if they had to abandon the wagon and walk. Samuel tried to repair the wheel, but his fingers were numb with cold and the light was fading fast. The snow fell heavier now, building up around them, erasing the trail they'd followed. As darkness settled over the landscape, Samuel realized they'd run out of options. They couldn't fix the wheel in these conditions. They couldn't walk out in the dark through deepening snow. They couldn't even build a proper fire with everything covered in white. They were going to die out here. He looked at Martha, wanting to say something profound, something worthy of 40 years together, but she was already looking at him, and in her eyes he saw no blame, no regret, only love and the quiet acceptance of whatever came next. That's when they heard it, a sound so faint at first that Samuel thought he'd imagined it, the crunch of footsteps in snow, growing closer through the storm. Someone was coming. The figure that emerged from the swirling snow looked like something from another age, a man built for this harsh country, weathered by it, shaped by it. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, moving with the steady confidence of someone who knew exactly where every step would land, even in near-zero visibility. A massive bearskin coat covered him from neck to knees, the fur thick and dark, crusted with ice. His beard was shot through with gray, his face lined deep from years of sun and wind and cold. He stopped 10 feet from their broken wagon, taking in the scene with eyes that missed nothing. Samuel felt himself being assessed, measured, and he straightened his back despite the exhaustion that pulled at his bones. "Trouble with your wheel," the man said. It wasn't a question. "Broke about an hour ago," Samuel replied. "We were trying to make it to the trading post. Trading post burned down 2 years back. Nobody uses this trail much anymore." The man moved closer, examining the damaged wheel with a practiced eye. "You're a long way from anywhere safe." Martha stepped forward, her voice steady despite the cold that made her words come out in visible puffs. "We're heading to Oregon to see our daughter." The mountain man looked at her, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Oregon's a fair piece from here, ma'am, especially in this weather." "How far to the nearest settlement?" Samuel asked, although part of him didn't want to hear the answer. Fort Bridger's 15 miles back the way you came. Nothing ahead for another 30, maybe more. He paused, studying the sky. This storm's just getting started. You'll be lucky to see morning if you stay here. Samuel felt Martha's hand find his in the darkness. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. The reality of their situation pressed down on him like a physical weight. I have a cabin, the man continued. 2 miles north of here, up in the timber. It's small, but it's warm and stocked for winter. I was headed there when I saw your tracks veering off the main trail. Hope flickered in Samuel's chest. You'd guide us there. I would. The man turned, looking back the way he'd come. But I'll be honest with you, it's a hard 2 miles in this weather. Might be more than you can manage. Samuel bristled at that, his pride rising despite everything. We can manage. We've come through worse. The mountain man's expression suggested he doubted that, but he didn't argue. Instead, he studied them both for a long moment, and Samuel had the uncomfortable feeling of being seen through, all his secrets and fears laid bare. My name's Ezra Cole, the man said finally. I've been living in these mountains for 5 years now. Trapping mostly, some hunting. I know this country better than I know my own face. Samuel Hendricks. This is my wife, Martha. Ezra nodded to Martha with a respect that Samuel appreciated. Out here, in the territories, you met all kinds of men, some who treated women as property, others who understood that survival often depended on a woman's strength as much as a man's. We'll need to leave the wagon, Ezra said, moving to examine their supplies. Take only what you can carry on your backs. Food, blankets, any medicine you have. Everything else stays. Samuel started to protest. Their whole lives were in that wagon, everything they owned that hadn't been sold or given away. But Martha's hand tightened on his, stopping the words. We understand, she said quietly. Ezra helped them sort through their belongings, his decisions quick and practical. The heavy trunk Martha had insisted on bringing stayed. The fancy dishes wrapped in cloth stayed. Even the small portrait of their sons, painted years ago, had to be left behind. Each item abandoned felt like another piece of their history being erased. But the wedding ring stayed on Martha's finger, and in Samuel's pocket, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, the letter he'd written to Rebecca, the one he'd planned for Martha to deliver alone. As they worked, Samuel studied Ezra Cole more closely. The man moved with an efficiency born of long practice, but there was something else there too, a kind of emptiness behind his eyes, as if he were going through the motions of living without fully inhabiting his own life. Samuel recognized that look. He'd seen it in men who'd lost everything that mattered and were just marking time until they could join whatever they'd lost. You live alone up there? Martha asked as she rolled blankets tight for carrying. I do. Must get lonely. Ezra's hands paused for just a moment in their work. I prefer it that way, Ma'am. Martha didn't press, but Samuel saw her exchange a glance with him. They'd learned over 40 years to read each other's thoughts, and he knew what she was thinking. This man was running from something, hiding from something. The mountains were full of such men, refugees from war, from loss, from lives that had broken them. When they'd packed what they could carry, Ezra produced a length of rope from somewhere in his coat. We tie ourselves together, he explained. Storm's getting worse. Visibility's going to be near nothing. This rope means we don't lose each other. He tied the rope around his own waist first, then secured it around Samuel, leaving about 10 feet between them. Martha was tied in last, another 10 feet behind Samuel. The arrangement felt uncomfortably like a chain gang, but Samuel understood the necessity. I'll break trail, Ezra said. You follow in my steps exactly. Don't try to see where we're going. You won't be able to. Just watch my back and put your feet where I put mine. If you fall, stay down until I come back for you. If you try to get up in a panic, you might pull us all down, and then we're all dead. Understood? Samuel nodded, though the instructions sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Mrs. Hendricks?" Ezra looked past Samuel to Martha. "I understand," she said clearly. "One more thing." Ezra pulled the bearskin coat from his shoulders. Underneath he wore a thick wool shirt and a leather vest, but it was still far less protection than the massive coat. Before Samuel could protest, Ezra had wrapped the bearskin around Martha, fastening it with leather ties. It dwarfed her, dragging the ground, but the warmth of it was immediate and obvious. "You can't," Martha started. "I can and I will," Ezra cut her off gently. "I'm used to this cold. You're not. Besides, that coat's too big for me anyway. Traded for it off a trapper who was 7 feet tall. Been trying to grow into it for 3 years now." It was a lie, Samuel knew. A kindness wrapped in a joke to make it acceptable. The coat fit Ezra perfectly, but the man was already turning away, checking the rope one more time, preparing to lead them into the storm. Samuel wanted to say something, to acknowledge what this stranger was doing for them. Ezra had been safe, had been heading home to his cabin and his solitude. He could have kept walking, could have told himself he never saw their tracks in the snow. Instead, he'd turned around. He'd come back into the storm. "Why?" Samuel asked, the word coming out before he could stop it. Ezra looked at him, snowflakes catching in his beard, his eyes distant with some private memory. "Because 5 years ago, nobody came back for me," he said quietly. "And I've been living with that ever since." Before Samuel could ask what he meant, Ezra turned and started walking north, into the teeth of the storm. The rope went taut, pulling at Samuel's waist. He glanced back once at their wagon, at the life they were leaving behind, then looked ahead at Martha's face barely visible through the snow. She nodded to him, that simple gesture that had carried them through 40 years of troubles. They started walking. The first 100 yards weren't so bad. Ezra's trail was clear enough to follow, his broad back visible ahead in the swirling white. But as the trees closed in and the wind picked up, funneling through the timber with a sound like distant screaming, the world shrank to just a few feet in every direction. Samuel concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other, on keeping his eyes on the rope that connected him to Ezra. Behind him, he could feel Martha's presence through the tension in the line, could sense when she stumbled or when the going got harder. Each time he wanted to turn back to help her, but Ezra's instructions had been clear. Keep moving forward. Trust the rope. Trust the man breaking trail ahead. The snow deepened as they climbed. What had been ankle-deep became knee-deep, then deeper still where drifts had formed. Ezra plowed through it like a force of nature, never slowing, never stopping. Samuel tried to match his pace, but his legs were older, his lungs burning with the effort and the cold. Twice he stumbled, going down to his knees in the snow. Both times, Ezra stopped immediately, the rope going slack, and waited for Samuel to regain his feet before continuing. No judgment, no impatience, just the steady presence of someone who understood that survival meant going at the speed of the slowest member. They'd been walking for what felt like hours, but might have been only 30 minutes when Samuel's legs simply gave out. One moment he was upright, struggling forward, and the next he was face down in the snow, the cold shocking against his skin. He tried to push himself up, but his arms wouldn't cooperate. Behind him, he felt Martha jerk to a stop, heard her calling his name. The rope around his waist tightened as Ezra came back down the trail. Strong hands gripped his shoulders, lifting him as easily as if he were a child. "I'm all right," Samuel gasped, though they both knew it was a lie. "Just need a moment." "We're halfway there," Ezra said, his voice close to Samuel's ear. "Can you make it the rest of the way?" Samuel wanted to say yes. Wanted to be the strong man he'd been 30 years ago, the man who'd cleared land and built houses and provided for his family through sheer determination. But that man was gone, worn away by time and illness and the accumulated weight of living. "I don't know," he admitted. Ezra was quiet for a moment, then, "Your wife's watching. What do you want her to see?" It was a challenge, but not a cruel one. A reminder that sometimes we find strength not in ourselves, but in who we're trying to be for others. Samuel looked back through the snow and saw Martha's face, pale and frightened, but resolute. 40 years, and she'd never given up on him. Never stopped believing he could be the man she needed. He couldn't quit now. "Let's go," Samuel said, finding his feet again. They continued into the darkness, into the storm that showed no sign of easing. And somewhere ahead, invisible in the night, was a cabin that might as well have been in another world for all Samuel could tell. But Ezra Cole kept walking, kept leading them forward, and so they followed. Because sometimes faith isn't about seeing the destination. Sometimes it's just about trusting the man holding the other end of the rope. The shelter appeared so suddenly out of the storm that Samuel thought at first he was hallucinating. One moment there was only white darkness and endless snow. The next there was a darker shape. Angular, man-made, solid. A structure, actual walls and a roof. "There," Ezra said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. Even the mountain man hadn't been entirely certain they'd find it. The shelter was small, barely more than a large shed, built into the lee side of a rock outcropping. One corner had partially collapsed, probably under snow load from previous winters, but the majority of the structure stood intact. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, half open to the storm. Ezra pushed it wider, and they stumbled inside out of the wind. The sudden absence of that constant howling was almost shocking. The silence rang in Samuel's ears. They stood in the darkness, breathing hard, snow melting off their clothes and forming puddles on the packed earth floor. "Stay here," Ezra said. "I'll check for animals." He moved deeper into the shelter, and Samuel heard him rustling around, making noise deliberately to scare off any creatures that might have taken up residence. A moment later, "Clear, just some old droppings, but nothing recent." Samuel's legs finally gave out completely. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold floor, his injured ankles screaming now that he'd stopped moving. Martha collapsed beside him, still wrapped in the massive bearskin coat. "We made it," she whispered, and her voice held the kind of wonder usually reserved for miracles. "Not out of danger yet," Ezra warned, already moving around the space with purpose. "Cold will kill us just as sure as the storm if we don't get warm. Samuel, can you move?" "In a minute." "Now. Move around, get your blood flowing. Mrs. Hendricks, you too. Walk, move your arms, anything. Don't let your body shut down." It was the last thing Samuel wanted to do, but he understood the necessity. He forced himself up, hobbling in small circles, Martha beside him. Ezra, meanwhile, was gathering what he could find in the shelter. A few pieces of ancient firewood stacked in one corner, some kindling that might have been left by the last occupant years ago, anything that would burn. In the center of the shelter was a rough fire ring made of stones. Ezra cleared out the old ashes and began building a new fire with practiced efficiency. From inside his shirt, he pulled a small metal box. A tinderbox, Samuel realized, one of the old-fashioned kind with charred cloth and flint. "This might take a while," Ezra said, striking the flint against steel. "Wood's damp from the storm, but we'll get it going." He struck again and again, tiny sparks flying, but not catching. Samuel watched, mesmerized, as Ezra worked with patient determination. Each strike was deliberate, controlled. No frustration, no panic. Just the steady repetition of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in conditions far worse. On the 10th try, a spark caught. The charred cloth began to glow, a tiny ember of red in the darkness. Ezra bent close, breathing on it gently, coaxing it to life. He transferred it to a nest of dry grass he'd pulled from his pack, breathed on it again. The glow spread. Then suddenly, there was flame. Small and tentative, but real. Ezra fed it carefully with the smallest pieces of kindling, building it up gradually until he could add larger pieces of wood. The fire struggled, smoking heavily from the damp wood. But it grew. Within 10 minutes, there was actual warmth radiating from it, and Samuel felt tears pricking his eyes at that simple comfort. They huddled around the fire, holding their hands toward the heat, steam rising from their wet clothes. Nobody spoke for a long time. They just absorbed the warmth and the reality that they were, for the moment, safe. As sensation returned to Samuel's extremities, so did pain. His ankle throbbed viciously. His fingers and toes burned with returning circulation. But he welcomed it because pain meant he was alive, meant he still had feeling in those parts. Numbness was the enemy. "We'll need more wood," Ezra said eventually. "This won't last the night, and we need to keep the fire going until the storm passes." "I'll help," Samuel offered, though the thought of going back out into that cold made him want to weep. "You'll stay here and tend your ankle. I'll go." Ezra stood, pulled his coat tighter. "Mrs. Hendricks, you keep the fire going. Add wood slowly. We can't afford to let it get too hot and burn through our supply too fast." "Wait," Martha said. She reached into the bearskin coat and pulled out a piece of cloth. Samuel recognized it as a scarf she'd been wearing. "Take this. At least cover your face." Ezra accepted it with a nod of thanks, wrapped it around his lower face, and headed for the door. Before he left, he turned back. "If I'm not back in an hour, don't come looking. Just keep warm and wait for daylight." Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, the storm's roar suddenly audible again in his absence. Samuel and Martha sat together by the fire, watching the flames dance. The light played across the shelter's walls, revealing old marks, initials carved into wood, dates going back decades. This place had saved others before them. Samuel wondered how many of those people had made it to their destinations, and how many had left their bones somewhere in these mountains. "Samuel," Martha said quietly, "tell me the truth. How bad is your ankle?" He considered lying, then decided she deserved better. "Bad. Swelling's gotten worse. I can barely put weight on it. When we get to Oregon, we'll find a proper doctor. Get it looked at." "Martha." "No." Her voice was firm. "We're going to make it. Both of us. I won't hear otherwise." Samuel looked at his wife of 40 years, saw the determination in her face, and made a decision. She deserved the truth. All of it. "There's something I need to tell you," he began. "About why I was so insistent on making this trip now, even with winter coming." Martha turned to face him fully, the firelight making her eyes bright. "I'm listening. Before we left Nebraska, I went to see Dr. Pritchard. Been having pains in my chest, trouble catching my breath. I thought it was just age, but..." He paused, the words harder than he'd expected. "He said my heart's failing. Said I had months, maybe a year if I was careful." Martha's face went very still. "How long have you known?" "Since September." 3 months. You've known for 3 months and didn't tell me. I didn't want to worry you. Didn't want you to spend our last days together watching me decline. I thought..." He stopped, shame flooding through him. "I thought maybe if I could get you to Rebecca, get you settled with family before I died, it would be better. Easier for you." "Easier." Martha's voice rose slightly. "You thought keeping this from me, letting me believe everything was fine, then dying on the trail and leaving me alone in the wilderness. You thought that would be easier." "I wasn't thinking clearly. I just knew I was running out of time, and I wanted to see Rebecca once more, wanted to know you'd be cared for when I was gone." Martha was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion but controlled. "Samuel Hendricks, you are the most foolish, stubborn, well-meaning man I've ever known, and I love you more than my own life. But I swear, if you ever keep something like this from me again..." She stopped, unable to continue. Samuel reached for her hand, found it cold despite the fire. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "We promised each other," Martha said. "In sickness and in health. That means I get to be there for the sickness too. That means we face it together." "I know. I know that now." The door burst open, and Ezra staggered in carrying an armload of broken branches crusted with snow. He kicked the door shut and dropped the wood near the fire. "Whole forest of deadfall out there," he said, brushing snow from his shoulders. "We'll have plenty to last the night." He looked at them, seemed to sense the tension in the air, but said nothing. Instead, he began arranging the new wood near the fire to dry, giving them space to work through whatever was between them. Martha squeezed Samuel's hand, then let go to help arrange the wood. "Thank you for going back out," she said to Ezra. "I know it wasn't easy." "Easier than sitting still," Ezra replied. "That's when the thoughts catch up to you." Samuel understood exactly what he meant. Action was easier than stillness, easier than facing the truth about yourself and your choices. Maybe that's why he'd pushed so hard to keep moving, to keep making plans, to stay busy right up until the end. Because stopping meant acknowledging reality. They worked in companionable silence, building up their wood supply, arranging their makeshift camp. As the night deepened and the storm raged outside, the three of them found a strange peace in that small shelter. Three people who'd been strangers hours before, now bound together by survival and honesty and the simple act of sharing warmth against the cold. Morning came without announcement. The storm blocked out any hint of dawn, leaving the world outside their shelter in a kind of perpetual twilight. Samuel woke to find himself curled near the fire, Martha pressed against his back for warmth, Ezra sitting upright near the door, keeping watch. The mountain man looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Samuel realized Ezra probably hadn't slept at all, had stayed awake through the night tending the fire and watching over them. "Storm's still going," Ezra said, noticing Samuel was awake. "Maybe worse than yesterday." Samuel sat up carefully, his body one enormous ache. His ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size. The boot now too tight. He'd have to cut it off eventually, but that would mean exposing his foot to the cold, and he wasn't ready to make that choice yet. Martha stirred, woke, assessed the situation with the quick efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime making decisions about what needed to be done. "We're low on wood already," she observed. "We burned through it faster than I'd hoped," Ezra admitted. "I'll need to go out again. Find more." "Not alone," Samuel said, though the thought of going back into that cold made his stomach clench. "You can barely walk, and we need someone to stay with Mrs. Hendricks, keep the fire going. Martha can come with you. I'll keep the fire." "Samuel," Martha started. "I'm slowing you down," Samuel interrupted. "Have been since we started. Out there gathering wood, my ankle will just make things harder. Better I stay here. Keep warm. Keep the fire alive." He saw the protest forming on Martha's lips, saw her weighing her desire to stay with him against the practical necessity of the situation. Finally, she nodded. "All right. But Ezra and I go together. Nobody goes alone." Before they left, Ezra did something unexpected. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small piece of cloth, a handkerchief, delicate and carefully folded. Even in the dim firelight, Samuel could see the embroidery work on it, intricate patterns done by a skilled hand. "My wife made this," Ezra said quietly, holding it as if it were made of spider silk. "Worked on it for months. Gave it to me on our 5th anniversary. His thumb traced the initials, stitched into one corner. "I've carried it every day since she died. Never could quite let it go." Martha stepped closer, looking at the handkerchief with the understanding of someone who'd done similar work, who knew the hours and love that went into such a piece. "It's beautiful. I thought—" Ezra paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I thought holding on to it kept her close. But maybe I've just been holding on to grief. Maybe it's time to let go." He looked at Samuel then, his eyes carrying a weight of meaning. You keep this while we're gone. It got me through 5 years of hard times. Figure it might help you through the next few hours." Samuel accepted the handkerchief with careful hands, understanding this was more than a simple loan. This was Ezra offering up his most precious possession, trusting them with his grief and his memories. It was an act of faith, of connection, of someone finally reaching out after years of isolation. "We'll keep it safe," Samuel promised. Ezra and Martha prepared to leave, wrapping themselves against the cold, checking that they had the rope to tie between them. Before they stepped out, Martha came to Samuel, bent down, and kissed his forehead, a gesture so tender and unexpected that it brought tears to his eyes. "Don't you dare die while I'm gone," she whispered. "Wouldn't dream of it." Then they were out the door, and Samuel was alone. The solitude pressed in immediately. The shelter felt larger without them, the walls farther away, the storm's howl louder. Samuel fed the fire carefully, following Ezra's instructions about maintaining it without burning through their supplies too fast. He held the handkerchief gently, studying the embroidery work. Anna Cole had been talented, patient. The stitches were tiny and perfect. The kind of work that required good light and steady hands and hours of dedication. Had she known, when she made this, that it would become her husband's connection to her memory? Had she imagined Ezra carrying it for years, unable to let go? Probably not. She'd probably just wanted to make something beautiful for the man she loved. Samuel thought about the letter in his pocket, the one he'd written to Rebecca explaining everything, his illness, his choices, his apologies. He'd meant for Martha to deliver it after he was gone, had planned his own ending without consulting anyone. What a fool he'd been, what a prideful, stubborn fool. Time passed strangely in the shelter. Without the sun to mark the hours, Samuel had no sense of how long they'd been gone. 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. He caught himself watching the door, listening for sounds of their return, fighting down the rising panic each time he imagined them lost, separated, frozen somewhere in the storm. His fever started gradually. At first he thought it was just the heat from the fire, but soon he recognized the familiar pattern. Chills despite the warmth, aches in his joints, a fog settling over his thoughts. The infection in his ankle must be spreading, his weakened body unable to fight it off effectively. He tried to stay alert, tried to keep feeding the fire, but his hands grew clumsy and his vision blurred. At some point he realized he was lying down, the handkerchief still clutched in his fist, the fire burning low. Got to get up, he thought. Got to add wood. Got to stay alive. But his body wouldn't obey. The fever had him now, dragging him down into confusion and half-dreams. He saw Rebecca as a little girl running through a field of wheat, saw his sons, the ones who died so young, playing together in some distant meadow. Saw his father, stern and weathered, watching him with eyes that held both judgment and love. "Not yet," his father seemed to say. "Your work's not finished." What work? Samuel wanted to ask. What's left for me to do? But his father was already fading, and the fever was pulling him deeper. Somewhere far away he heard a door opening, heard Martha's voice calling his name with an edge of fear, felt hands on his face, checking his temperature, heard Ezra's low voice. "Fever's set in. We need to cool him down, but carefully." "Samuel." Martha's voice was close now, urgent. "Samuel, stay with me. Stay with me." "I'm trying," he wanted to say. "I'm trying so hard." But the darkness was warm and welcoming, and it was so much easier to just let go, to stop fighting, to rest. "No," Martha's voice cut through the fog. "No, you don't get to leave me. Not like this, not after everything." He felt something cool on his forehead, a cloth, damp and soothing. Felt Martha's hand gripping his, refusing to let go. And somehow that connection pulled him back from the edge, anchored him to the world of the living. He opened his eyes to find Martha's face above him, tears streaming down her cheeks, her expression fierce with determination. Behind her, Ezra worked to build up the fire, to arrange blankets, to do all the practical things that needed doing. "There you are," Martha whispered. "There you are. Now you stay here. You stay with me." Samuel tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Martha lifted a cup of water to his lips, helped him drink. The water was cold and pure, melting snow heated just enough to be drinkable, and it tasted like life itself. "The handkerchief," Samuel managed to croak. "Did I?" "You're still holding it," Martha said gently. "Held on to it the whole time." Samuel looked down at his fist, saw the delicate cloth crushed in his grip, and carefully, slowly, forced his fingers to relax. The handkerchief was wrinkled but undamaged, Anna Cole's careful stitches still perfect after all these years. Dawn of the third day came with a subtle change. The wind had lessened, the howling reduced to a steady murmur rather than a scream. Samuel woke from fever-haunted dreams to find Martha sleeping beside him, her hand still clasped in his, and Ezra standing near the partially collapsed corner of the shelter, looking out through a gap at the world beyond. "Storm's breaking," Ezra said without turning. "Another few hours, maybe, and it'll be clear enough to move." Samuel tried to sit up, found the effort almost beyond him. His fever had peaked during the night. He remembered fragments of it. Remembered Martha's cool hands on his forehead, remembered Ezra feeding the fire with religious dedication, remembered words whispered in the darkness that might have been prayers or might have been promises. "How's your ankle?" Martha asked, suddenly awake beside him, her eyes alert despite obvious exhaustion. "Bad," Samuel admitted. There was no point in lying anymore. "Needs proper treatment, soon." "There's a settlement," Ezra said, still watching the storm. "Wasn't sure before, but I saw smoke yesterday, before the weather got worse. About 5 miles east of here, down in the valley. If we can get there, we'll get there," Martha interrupted. "We've come this far." Samuel looked at his wife, at the determination in her face that hadn't diminished despite 3 days of hell, and felt something break inside him. She deserved better than his secrets, better than his pride-driven decisions. She deserved the truth. "Martha," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Need Ezra to hear it too. Samuel, you need to rest." "No, this can't wait." He reached into his coat with trembling fingers, found the oilcloth-wrapped package he'd carried all this way. "There's a letter. For Rebecca. I wrote it before we left Nebraska." Martha took the package, unwrapped it carefully. The letter inside was addressed to their daughter in Samuel's careful script. She looked at it, then at him, questions in her eyes. "Open it," Samuel said. "Read it out loud. Both of you need to know." Martha broke the seal with careful fingers, unfolded the paper. In the dim morning light filtering through the shelter, she began to read. "My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then I have departed this world, and your mother has made it safely to Oregon with the help of a good man I pray Providence sent to help her. I need you to know that my death was not an accident or a tragedy, but a choice made with what I believed was love." Martha's voice faltered. She looked at Samuel, horror and understanding dawning in her eyes. "Keep reading," Samuel said gently. "The doctors told me in September that my heart is failing. Months left, they said, maybe a year. I could have told your mother, could have let her nurse me through the decline, watch me waste away, but I couldn't bear that. Couldn't bear being a burden, couldn't bear seeing the pity in her eyes every time I grew weaker." Martha's hand shook, the paper rustling. Ezra had turned now, his attention fully on them, his face grave. "So I convinced her we should make this journey before winter. Knew it was dangerous, knew the odds were against us, but I believed that if I could get her most of the way to you, if I could arrange for her to have help, then I could simply stop, let the cold take me, make it look like an accident. Spare her the long goodbye. "Oh, Samuel," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "Oh, Samuel, what did you do?" "Let me finish," Samuel said, though his own voice was thick with emotion. "Please," Martha continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know this was cowardly, I know this was wrong, but, Rebecca, I was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of pretending to be strong, tired of being the man everyone needed me to be. And I truly thought, that dying in the wilderness, with the mountains and the sky as my witness, would be better than dying in a bed, diminished and helpless." The shelter was utterly silent except for the crackling fire and the wind outside. "I'm writing this in case my plan succeeds, in case your mother arrives alone so she'll understand. So she'll know it wasn't her fault, so she'll know I loved her too much to let her watch me fade away. Your father, Samuel Hendricks." Martha finished reading and sat motionless, the letter in her lap, tears falling onto the paper and smudging the ink. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw with hurt and anger. "You were going to leave me out there, in the snow, alone. I thought Ezra would help you. You thought wrong." Her voice rose. "You thought you could make that choice for me, could decide what I could and couldn't handle. After 40 years, you still don't understand." "Martha." "No." She stood up, the bearskin coat falling away, her small frame somehow commanding in the dim light. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to love me so much that you think you can protect me from grief by inflicting something worse." Ezra spoke then, his voice quiet, but carrying weight. "Mr. Hendricks, I've seen a lot of death in these mountains. I've seen men die from accidents, from stupidity, from bad luck, but the worst deaths, the ones that haunt me, are the ones that were chosen. Because they don't just kill the person. They kill something in everyone left behind." "I know that now," Samuel said, shame flooding through him. "I understand, but at the time you were scared," Martha interrupted, her anger softening slightly. "Scared of being weak, scared of being dependent, scared that I wouldn't love you anymore if you couldn't be strong." "Yes," Samuel admitted, the word barely audible. "Samuel Hendricks, I didn't fall in love with your strength. I fell in love with your heart, your kindness, the way you looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. And those things, they don't diminish just because your body does." She knelt beside him again, took his face in her hands. "I don't need you to be strong. I need you to be honest. I need you to let me be there, let me help, let me love you through whatever comes. That's what marriage means. Not just the good parts. All of it." Samuel felt tears running down his cheeks, 40 years of held emotions finally breaking through. I'm so sorry I put you through this, put us all through this." "You should be sorry," Martha said, but her voice was gentle now. "But you're also going to make it right. You're going to survive this. You're going to get to Oregon, and you're going to let me take care of you when you need it, without shame, without pride getting in the way. Can you do that?" "I can try." "Good. Because I'm not done with you yet. We've got grandchildren to meet, a daughter to see, a whole life still to live. Your heart might be failing, but we're not giving up until it absolutely quits. You understand me?" Samuel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Ezra had been standing quietly during this exchange, but now he stepped forward. "Mr. Hendricks, can I be honest with you? Please. When I lost my wife and daughter, I thought I'd lost everything worth living for. Spent 5 years hiding in these mountains, convincing myself that isolation was better than risking that kind of pain again. But these past few days, watching you two, the way your wife fought for you, the way you finally let yourself be vulnerable, it made me realize something." He paused, looking at the handkerchief still lying near the fire. "We don't honor the people we've lost by giving up. We honor them by living, by connecting, by being brave enough to love even when we know it might hurt. Anna would have hated seeing me the way I've been. would have told me to stop hiding and start living again. So what will you do? Martha asked. I'm going to see you both to that settlement. Make sure you're safe. Make sure Mr. Hendricks gets proper care. And then, he smiled slightly, the first real smile Samuel had seen on his face. Then maybe I'll stop running. Maybe I'll go to Oregon with you if you'll have me. Meet your daughter, help you get settled. Find out if there's still a place in this world for a man who's spent too long alone. Martha reached out and took Ezra's hand, then Samuel's, linking the three of them. We'd be honored to have you, wouldn't we, Samuel? More than honored, Samuel agreed. You saved our lives. Both of them. The least we can do is share our family with you. The light through the gaps in the shelter was growing stronger now. The storm was definitely breaking, the world beyond their small refuge becoming visible again. Patches of blue appeared in the sky and the snow had stopped falling. We should prepare to move, Ezra said. That settlement's not going to come to us. They spent the next hour organizing what supplies they had, preparing Samuel for the journey ahead. They cut the boot off his swollen ankle, wrapped it as best they could with cloth torn from their spare clothes. It would be agony to walk on, but they had no choice. Staying here meant dying when their supplies ran out. Before they left, Martha did something unexpected. She took the letter Samuel had written, the one meant to explain his death, and carefully fed it to the fire. They watched it burn, the words curling and blackening, the ashes rising up the chimney and out into the clearing sky. That ending's not ours, Martha said firmly. We're writing a new one. Samuel watched the last of the letter disappear, felt the weight of his intended choice lift from his shoulders. She was right. They were still alive, still together, still moving forward. The story wasn't over yet. Ezra tied them together with the rope again, but this time it felt different. Not just a survival tool, but a symbol of their connection, their commitment to each other, and to making it through together. They stepped out of the shelter into a world transformed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of pristine white under a sky slowly turning blue. The beauty of it was almost painful. So much suffering endured to witness this peace, this clarity. 5 miles, Ezra said, pointing to where a thin column of smoke rose in the distance. We can make that. Together, Martha added. Samuel looked at them both, his wife of 40 years who refused to let him give up, and the stranger who'd become something more than a friend. Together, he agreed. The journey to the settlement should have taken 2 hours, maybe 3 for healthy travelers in good conditions. For them, it became a test of will that stretched across the entire day. They fashioned a rough travois from branches and spare rope, something to support Samuel when his ankle gave out completely. It wasn't elegant, just 2 long poles with cross pieces and blankets lashed between them, but it worked. Samuel protested at first, hating the idea of being dragged like cargo, but Martha's expression left no room for argument. Pride has nearly killed you once already, she said firmly. Don't let it finish the job. So Samuel lay on the travois, and Ezra and Martha took turns pulling it through the snow. The going was impossibly slow. What looked flat from a distance revealed itself as a series of small hills and gullies, each one requiring careful navigation. The snow was deep in places, requiring them to break trail before they could drag the travois through. And Samuel's fever, though less intense than yesterday, kept returning in waves that left him delirious and shaking. But they pressed on. Mile by painful mile, foot by agonizing foot, Ezra's compass, an old brass instrument that had guided him through countless journeys in these mountains, became their North Star. He'd take it out every few hundred yards, check their bearing, adjust their course. The smoke they'd seen from the shelter was no longer visible. The wind had shifted, carrying it away, but Ezra seemed to have the settlement's location fixed in his mind with absolute certainty. You trust that thing? Samuel asked during one of his lucid periods, watching Ezra study the compass. "With my life," Ezra replied. "And yours?" "It belonged to my father and his father before him. 3 generations of coal men have used this compass to find their way home." "And you?" Martha asked, supporting the travois from behind while they rested. "Did it bring you home?" Ezra was quiet for a moment. "No, but then I stopped looking for home, started just wandering instead. Maybe that's about to change." They continued, and Samuel found himself drifting between consciousness and dreams. In his dreams, he was young again, walking through fields with Martha, both of them laughing about something he couldn't quite remember. Then he was older, holding his sons before they died, feeling their small hearts beating against his chest. Then he was somewhere else entirely, somewhere warm and bright, and someone was calling his name. "Samuel," Martha's voice cut through the fog. "Samuel, wake up. We need you awake." He opened his eyes to find they'd stopped. Ahead of them, perhaps half a mile away, he could see buildings, actual structures, a real settlement. They'd made it. They were going to survive. But between them and safety lay one more obstacle. A river cut across their path, its dark water visible through a covering of ice that looked treacherous and unstable. The ice was thick enough to be white, and solid in some places, but thin and translucent in others. And there was no way around it. The river curved through the valley, and going around would add miles they didn't have. "How wide is it?" Martha asked. 30 feet, maybe 40. Ezra studied the ice carefully. "In summer, you could wade across, but now we have to cross on that ice," Samuel finished, understanding the problem immediately. "And there's no guarantee it'll hold our weight." "There are ways to test it," Ezra said. "But even if it holds me, that doesn't mean it'll hold the travois with you on it. Too much weight concentrated in one spot, and it could break through." They stood looking at the ice, all 3 of them understanding the implications. They were so close. The settlement was right there, smoke rising from chimneys, the promise of warmth and safety and proper medical care. But between here and there was a crossing that could kill them just as surely as the storm. "What if we lighten the travois?" Martha suggested. "Leave behind everything we don't absolutely need." "Won't be enough," Ezra said. "Even just Mr. Hendricks' weight might be too much for the weak spots." "Then I walk," Samuel said, though the thought of putting weight on his ruined ankle made him want to weep. "You can barely stand, let alone walk 40 feet across uncertain ice." They were quiet, each of them thinking through options, none of them good. Samuel watched a bird fly overhead. Some winter sparrow, hardy enough to survive this weather, and envied its ability to simply fly over obstacles rather than having to face them. Then he had an idea, a terrible, dangerous idea, but perhaps their only choice. "What if we distribute the weight?" he said. "Not all together, but spread out." Ezra looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I walk, but you and Martha support me on either side, one arm over each of your shoulders. That way my weight is on both of you, not concentrated in one spot. We move slowly, test each step. If the ice starts to crack, you both let go and get clear. I'll take my chances." "Absolutely not," Martha said immediately. "I'm not letting you drown to save myself." "Martha." "No. If we're doing this, we do it together. All of us make it or none of us do." Ezra studied the ice again, then looked at Samuel with something like respect in his eyes. "It might work. Might. We'd need to move very carefully, test every step. And if it starts to go, we all get clear," Martha interrupted. "Nobody gets left behind. That's not negotiable." They spent the next 30 minutes preparing. Ezra cut 2 long poles from nearby trees, stripped them of branches. These would be used to probe ahead, testing the ice before they put weight on it. They redistributed what little gear they carried, making sure nothing was so heavy it would drag someone down if they went through the ice. Martha took the handkerchief from Samuel, tucked it carefully into her dress. If, "Something happens to me," she said. "You make sure Ezra keeps this. Pass it on to someone who needs it." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Samuel said fiercely. "I won't allow it." "You don't get to decide that, Samuel Hendricks, but I appreciate the sentiment." When they were ready, they approached the ice. Ezra went first, testing each step with his pole, listening for the groan and crack of ice under stress. The first few steps were solid. The ice here was thick, milky white, clearly safe. But 20 feet out, it began to change. Clearer ice, which meant thinner, more dangerous. Samuel stood between Martha and Ezra, an arm over each of their shoulders, trying to keep as much weight as possible on his good leg. Pain radiated from his injured ankle with every small movement, but he gritted his teeth and stayed silent. Complaining wouldn't help anyone. They moved forward together, one careful step at a time. The ice groaned beneath them, a deep, unsettling sound that Samuel felt through the soles of his feet. He tried not to think about the dark water below, about how cold it would be, about how quickly someone could die in water that temperature. Halfway across, the ice cracked. Not a catastrophic break, just a small fissure that appeared beneath Ezra's foot and spread outward like a spider web. They all froze, hardly breathing, waiting to see if the ice would hold or if this was the beginning of the end. The crack stopped spreading. The ice held, but barely. "We need to redistribute," Ezra said quietly. "Move apart slightly. 3 separate points of pressure instead of concentrated weight." They shifted, Samuel now walking mostly on his own, Martha and Ezra on either side, but not quite touching him. It was agony on his ankle, white-hot pain that made black spots dance in his vision. But he forced himself to keep going. Another step, another crack, this one smaller. The ice groaned again, a sound like the earth itself was protesting their passage. Samuel could see the far bank now, less than 15 feet away. So close. So impossibly close. 10 feet. 9. 8. The ice gave way beneath Samuel's good leg. One moment he was standing, the next he was falling, the crack opening up beneath him like a hungry mouth. He had just enough time to think, this is it, this is how it ends, before hands grabbed him, Martha on one side, Ezra on the other, their grips like iron, refusing to let him fall. The ice around them was breaking now, multiple cracks spreading, the whole section becoming unstable. They had seconds, maybe less. "Move!" Ezra shouted, and they lunged forward together, Samuel between them, all 3 scrambling for the solid ice near the bank. His injured ankle screamed as it took weight, but there was no choice now, no time for caution. It was move or die. They hit the solid ice just as the section behind them collapsed completely, dark water surging up through the hole. Another 3 seconds and they would have been in it. Another 5, and they would have been under it, trapped beneath the ice with no way up. They crawled the last few feet onto the snowy bank and collapsed, gasping, hearts racing. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They just lay there, breathing hard, feeling the solid ground beneath them, alive when they had every reason to be dead. "That," Martha said finally, "was closer than I ever want to come again." "Agreed," Ezra said. Samuel couldn't speak at all. The pain in his ankle had become absolute, drowning out everything else. He felt consciousness slipping away again, felt the fever returning with a vengeance, felt his body finally saying enough. "I've done all I can." "Samuel?" Martha's face appeared above him, concerned. "Samuel, stay with us. We're almost there, just a little bit farther." But the darkness was pulling at him again, and this time he wasn't sure he had the strength to resist. The last thing he saw before he passed out was the settlement ahead, smoke rising from chimneys, and above it all, a clear blue sky. The storm finally, truly over. Then nothing. Night fell over the settlement, and with it came the worst hours. Samuel's fever spiked again as his body fought the infection, and Dr. Morrison warned them that the next 24 hours would be critical. Either his body would win the fight, or the infection would spread despite her best efforts. Martha refused to leave his side. She sat in a wooden chair beside the clinic bed, holding his hand, occasionally wiping his forehead with a cool cloth when the fever made him delirious. Ezra stayed too, sitting near the door, keeping his own vigil. The settlement had provided them with everything they needed: clean clothes, hot food, a warm place to rest, but none of it mattered if Samuel didn't survive. In his fever, Samuel talked. He called out for his sons, the ones who died so young. He spoke to his father, asking for forgiveness for things Martha didn't understand. He recited fragments of prayers and pieces of conversations from 40 years of marriage. And through it all, Martha listened, learning things about her husband she'd never known, seeing into corners of his heart he'd kept hidden even from her. "I'm sorry," he said at one point, his eyes open but not quite focused on her. "Should have been stronger. Should have been better." "You were perfect," Martha whispered back. "You were exactly what I needed." Ezra stood and moved closer, drawn by something in the conversation. "Mr. Hendricks," he said quietly. "Samuel, can you hear me?" Samuel's eyes found him, clarity returning for a moment. "Ezra, you're still here." "I'm not going anywhere. Not until I know you're all right." "The handkerchief," Samuel said. "Martha has it. You should take it back." Ezra shook his head. "I think it's done its work for me. Maybe it's time to pass it on. Let it help someone else." Samuel seemed to understand something in that statement, something deeper than just the words. He reached out with his free hand, and Ezra took it so that the three of them formed a chain, Martha holding Samuel's left hand, Ezra his right, all of them connected. "I gave up," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. 5 years ago, after Anna and Elizabeth died, I gave up on everything that mattered, told myself it was easier to be alone, safer to not care. But it wasn't easier. It was just empty." "I know," Ezra replied. "I've been living the same way. These past few days, watching you and Martha fight so hard to keep me alive. Even when I'd half decided to die, it reminded me what I'd lost, what I'd thrown away." He paused, gathering strength. "I want to live again, Samuel. Really live. Not just survive." "Then you will," Samuel said with surprising strength. "You'll come with us to Oregon. Meet our daughter. Find your place again. If you make it." "When I make it," Samuel corrected. And there was steel in his voice now, determination that Martha recognized from their early years together. "I've got too much to live for to quit now." The fever broke sometime around midnight. One moment Samuel was burning up, delirious with heat. The next he was cool to the touch, breathing deeply and naturally. Martha felt the change and almost wept with relief. Dr. Morrison came to check on him, felt his forehead, his pulse, examined his ankle carefully. "The infection's retreating," she said, wonder in her voice. "His body's winning. I've seen men younger and stronger lose this fight, but he's actually winning." "He's stubborn," Martha said with a smile. "Stubborn's a good quality in a patient." Dr. Morrison adjusted his blankets. "He'll need weeks of rest, maybe months. That ankle will never be quite right again. He'll have a limp, probably some pain in cold weather. But he should keep the foot, and if we're careful with his heart, he might have years yet." Martha looked at Ezra, saw tears on his weathered face, saw him quickly wipe them away. "Thank you," she said to him, "for everything." "I should be thanking you," Ezra replied. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope." The next morning brought a visitor, the settlement's telegraph operator, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. "Dr. Morrison said you needed to send word to Oregon?" "Yes," Martha said. realizing they should have thought of this sooner. "To our daughter. She'll be worried." The operator produced a pad and pencil. "What would you like to say?" Martha thought for a moment, then dictated, "Rebecca, your father and I caught in blizzard. Safe now in Wyoming settlement. Father recovering from injury, but will be fine. Coming to Oregon in spring. Bringing a friend. Love, mother and father." The operator wrote it down, read it back. "That'll go out within the hour. Should reach Oregon by tomorrow." After he left, Samuel, awake now and lucid, looked at Martha. "Bringing a friend? Unless Mr. Cole has changed his mind about joining us?" Ezra, who'd been dozing in his chair, opened his eyes. No, I haven't changed my mind. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to go with you." "It's settled then," Samuel said. "When spring comes, the three of us head to Oregon." "For," Dr. Morrison said from the doorway, surprising them all. "The settlement's getting too small for me. I've been thinking about moving on, finding a larger town where I can do more good. Oregon sounds like just the place." Martha laughed, a sound of pure joy that filled the small clinic. "Then 4 it is. We'll all go together." Samuel closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his face. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt at peace. The storm had nearly killed them, but it had also given them something precious, a second chance, a new beginning, and this time he wasn't going to waste it. Spring came slowly to the Wyoming settlement, the snow retreating inch by grudging inch, revealing brown grass and muddy earth beneath. Samuel watched it from the window of the boarding house room they'd taken, marking the progress of the seasons like a prisoner counting days until freedom. His ankle had healed as well as Dr. Morrison had predicted, which meant it had healed poorly but sufficiently. He could walk now with the aid of a cane the settlement's blacksmith had fashioned for him, though each step brought a dull ache that reminded him of how close he'd come to losing everything. But he was alive. That was what mattered. The settlement had embraced them during their long winter recovery. Samuel and Martha helped where they could. Martha with sewing and cooking. Samuel with bookkeeping for the general store once he was well enough to sit up for long periods. Ezra found work as a hunter and guide, his wilderness skills valuable to a community that still depended on game for much of its food. And Dr. Morrison continued her practice, grateful to have Martha's help with the more difficult cases. They became, in those months, something more than strangers who'd survived a storm together. They became family. Ezra had taken to visiting most evenings, sitting with Samuel and Martha by the fire, sharing stories of his past that he'd kept locked away for 5 years. He spoke about Anna, about Elizabeth, about the life he'd had before grief hollowed him out. And in the speaking, something healed in him. The emptiness in his eyes filled with light again. He laughed more easily. He let himself hope. One evening in early March, when the snow was nearly gone and the first hints of green were appearing on the trees, Ezra arrived carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I made you something," he said to Samuel, unusually hesitant, "for the journey ahead." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a walking stick, beautifully carved from a single piece of seasoned oak. But it wasn't just a walking stick. It was a work of art. Along its length, Ezra had carved symbols and scenes, each one telling part of their story. Near the top, 3 figures stood together, connected by a line representing the rope that had bound them. Below that, a mountain range, the peaks sharp and dangerous. Then a small shelter with flames visible through its door. A river with cracked ice. And at the bottom, near the base, a compass rose with all directions marked clearly. Samuel took it with trembling hands, running his fingers over the smooth wood, feeling the care and time that had gone into each carved detail. "Ezra, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll use it," Ezra replied. "Say you'll lean on it when you need to, without shame, and when you pass it down someday, to your daughter, To your grandchildren, tell them the story. Tell them about the winter we survived together." "I will," Samuel promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear I will." April brought the letter from Rebecca. It arrived on a warm afternoon, delivered by the same telegraph operator who'd sent their original message months before. Martha read it aloud, her voice catching on certain words. "Mother and Father, your telegram reached us in January, and I've been sick with worry ever since. Thank God you are safe. The house is ready for you. Come as soon as you can travel, and bring your friend. Anyone who saved your lives is family to us. Your loving daughter, Rebecca." They left the settlement in late April, when the high passes were clear and travel was safe again. The entire community turned out to see them off, standing in the muddy main street to wave goodbye. Dr. Morrison had closed her practice and packed her medical supplies. Ezra had purchased horses for all of them, using money he'd saved from his winter work. The journey to Oregon took 6 weeks, but it was nothing like the desperate flight from the blizzard. They traveled slowly, camping under stars, sharing meals around evening fires. Samuel leaned on his walking stick and found he didn't mind the support it provided. Martha rode beside him, her hand occasionally reaching out to touch his arm, as if reassuring herself that he was still there. They reached Rebecca's farm on a bright morning in June. The valley spread out before them like something from a painting. Green fields, grazing animals, a sturdy house with smoke rising from its chimney. As they descended the final hill, Samuel saw a woman emerge from the house, shading her eyes to look at them. Then she was running, her skirts hiked up, calling for someone inside. Rebecca reached them breathless, tears streaming down her face. She was 35 now, no longer the girl who'd left them 5 years ago, but a woman grown, and behind her came 3 children, the grandchildren Samuel had feared he'd never meet. Martha dismounted and went to her daughter, and the 2 women embraced, holding each other as if they might never let go. Samuel climbed down more slowly, leaning on his walking stick, and his grandson, Samuel, Jr., 8 years old, approached him with wide eyes. "Are you really my grandfather?" the boy asked. "I am," Samuel confirmed, kneeling with some difficulty to look the child in the eye. "And this is your grandmother, and this is our dear friend Ezra Cole and Dr. Sarah Morrison. We've all come a very long way to meet you." The boy's eyes went to the walking stick. "What are those pictures?" "Those are stories," Samuel said. "Would you like to hear them?" The boy nodded eagerly, and Samuel found himself telling the tale. The blizzard, the rope, the shelter, the crossing. He told it simply, without embellishment, but the children listened with rapt attention. Rebecca stood beside Martha, her arm around her mother's waist, tears in her eyes as she heard how close she'd come to losing them both. When the story was done, Samuel's eldest grandson reached out and touched the carved figures on the walking stick. "You were very brave," he said solemnly. "No," Samuel corrected gently. "We were very lucky, lucky to have each other, lucky to have help when we needed it, lucky to get a second chance." That evening, they sat together on Rebecca's porch. All of them, the family expanded now to include Ezra and Dr. Morrison. The children played in the yard, their laughter carrying across the valley. Rebecca served a meal she'd been preparing all day, and as the sun set over the Oregon hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, Samuel felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Martha took his hand, her fingers finding his as naturally as they had for 40 years. "We made it," she said quietly. "We did," Samuel agreed. "Together." Ezra raised his cup. "To second chances. To new beginnings," Dr. Morrison added. "To family," Rebecca said, her voice warm. "Both the one we're born into and the one we choose." They drank, and in that moment, Samuel understood something profound. The storm hadn't been the end of his story. It had been a new beginning, a chance to shed his pride, to accept help, to truly understand what mattered. He'd set out to die with dignity in the wilderness. Instead, he'd learned to live with humility among friends who'd become family. He looked at the walking stick propped against his chair, at the 3 figures carved into its surface, forever bound together by their journey through the storm. And he smiled, knowing that this story, their story, would be told and retold for generations, a reminder that sometimes the hardest journeys lead exactly where we need to be. The night deepened, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. The children were called into bed. The adults remained on the porch, talking quietly, planning the days ahead. And Samuel Hendricks, who'd once been so certain his time was over, felt his heart, weak as it was, fill with gratitude for every unexpected day he'd been given. He was home. They all were. And that was everything.